slight bit of self-revelation. For those of you that have been around for a while, this will be no news to you, but for the new folks here, personally, I have a terrible time staying mentally focused. The slightest little distraction and I'll lose my train of thought, and it's very tough for me sometimes to go back and find my train of thought after the fact. Anybody else that struggles with this a little bit? I have to really create a vacuum, especially for studying and sermonizing and things like this, because the slightest little noise, the slightest little distraction, and I'm like really off track for a minute. And so as much as I love music, I can't listen to music in those times, because guess what I'll be doing? Instead of studying in my mind, I'll be singing along with the song, and I'll lose track. I can't go to sleep with a TV playing or a radio playing. Why? Because in my mind, I'm trying to keep up with what's going on. So I have a bit of a time staying on task and not being distracted. Shelly helps me with that. She really does a lot. But let me just say, when I'm driving, I can do 11 things at one time. No problem. When I'm driving, I can multitask. In fact, I don't think distractions are the biggest problem for me, or even a slight problem for me when I drive. How many of you feel like you can drive and distractions are no problem? I'm with you, man. I'm going to start a school called the Offensive Driving School. You take the defensive one if you want. I'm going to teach an offensive one. To me, if you can get all the knuckleheads behind you, you're far safer, right? But let me say this. A safety study was done using in-car cameras, and it tried to show or identify the distractions that people had as they drive. 25% of all traffic accidents were caused by, you guessed it, distractions, right? 7 of 10 drivers studied were found to be distracted during testing. So 7 out of 10 drivers are distracted while they drive, and then 25% of all crashes are caused by, you with me? What are they called? Distractions. What distraction do you think was the greatest? Yeah, right? We would all guess that it would be the cell phone, wouldn't we? We would guess that it would be the cell phone. It wasn't the biggest distraction. It was further down the list, believe it or not. That was one of them. Guess what the number one distraction was? Manipulating the audio. That was the number one. I was surprised. Guess what the second one was? Eating and drinking. Now, here's the thing. In my offensive driving school, if you can't eat and drive, you need to come see me. I'll give you a lesson. You got to drive with your knee. Man, I could eat a chili cheese jalapeno burger from Sonic and not get messy. You throw your knee up there and you get her done. You can't drive with your knee? Yeah, I'll teach you. It's easy. I'll teach you. But 71% ate or drank, and that was a distraction. Now, we know this one if we're married. What's the other one? Self-grooming. Everybody grooms while they drive. Now, some of us do all the above while we drive. 40% of the drivers actually read or wrote. That surprised me a little bit. Now, let's be fair. Most of the reading and writing and a third of the grooming went on while they were at stop signs or whatever, but still, they're the ones you got to honk at to get them moving in the morning. They're at that green light. When that thing's green, put your foot in the throttle body. Let's get started, right? Now, the one thing we didn't talk about, little girl, pop that gum one more time. You tracking with me? You ever remember this one? If you get good at it, you have 2 youngins in the back seat fighting over one body being a centimeter over their space, you can reach back there and you can paintbrush them both at one time. Can you? All right, I'll teach you to knee drive. I'll teach you to paintbrush. It's easy. But those are all things that are distracting when we drive. Now, in all seriousness, experts say that people often underestimate the seriousness of distractions because not every distraction leads to a crash. But he added this too. If you're distracted though, just when someone pulls out in front of you, your lack of attention can be catastrophic. Right? On a similar note, there's a gentleman named William H. Henson, and he tells us why lion tamers, man, they got the pistol, they got the whip, why do they need a stool? You ever wondered? You ever seen lion tamers? That's what I thought. But then I'm like, wait a minute, I just shoot him. If I got the gun, I'm good. I'm not even sure I need the whip other than make some racket. So what's the stool for? I learned something new when I looked into this. When that Tamar goes into the lion's cage and he's carrying that stool. He would tell you it's actually the most important thing he has in there. Not the gun, not the whip, but the stool. Here's why. He holds the stool by the back and he presses forward with the legs all at once. He thrusts it at the lion. And guess what the lion does? The lion tries to focus on all four legs at once. And the distraction of trying to do that overwhelms him to the point of a near paralysis. It's a problem for him to try to and he doesn't know what to do. What does it do to? It's due to his fragmented attention. The way that you stay safe with a lion is distract him. Now keep that in your minds as we go forward this morning. I'm going to encourage you, if you have your Bibles, to go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 14. We're going to pick back up where we left off in verse 22. Matthew 14 and 22. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After dismissing the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. Let's stop right there. What is he dismissing the crowds from? What did we talk about last week? Think about this. In one 24-hour period, in one day, multitudes of people learned how much God can do when we give him just the smallest little thing to bless. 5 loaves and 2 fish is enough to feed thousands if Jesus touches on it. The prayer of blessing brings miracles, right? They were also taught that Jesus will not be made king on someone else's terms, only on his terms. We want Jesus to be king of our lives. He's not going to do it the way we want to do it. He's only going to do it the way he's going to do it. Now, the disciples are going to learn something really amazing now. What happens when the little bit that we give God to bless is focused and undistracted faith? When we give God focused and undistracted faith, comparatively speaking to 5 loaves and 2 fish, what can he do with it? You with me? Immediately, Jesus, made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After dismissing the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already over a mile from land, battered by the waves because the wind was against them. Around 3 a.m, he came toward them walking on the sea, and when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. You heard this story before? We sang about it. Let's talk about it now. It has been supposed, and I think this is probably true, that there's a couple of reasons why Jesus divides his team right now, and he sends the disciples in one direction, and then he goes in another. And one of those is that if the disciples left, that would convince the crowds to leave. So there's some thought that he moved his disciples onward towards the boat because he knew that was about the only way they were going to disperse this crowd. They'd just seen an unbelievable miracle. They weren't going anywhere unless they were prompted to do so. And that did another thing. It protected the disciples from this temptation of trying to inaugurate him as king on terms other than his own. You remember, right? They were trying to forcibly take him and make him king. That's when he did this. He went up into the mountain to pray. He sent his disciples to sail off. Now, most people think, and I can kind of picture this. Y'all ever sailed on a boat? You ever been on a boat? Okay. Some people are terrified of boats, especially when they can't see land anymore. But picture this. He's on the mountain. They're sailing. Don't you suppose they probably sailed and skirted the land so that they could what? They could see him when he needed to be picked up, and they could pull up and get him. So it's probably that they were skirting the land, hugging the shore, but then something happens. It starts getting dark. Jesus is on the mountain. Finally, he's found some solitude. And this darkness brings a storm that blows this boat of the disciples out to sea. If you have the King James, it says the wind was contrary to them. What does contrary mean? It was blowing in their face. They're in contrary circumstances. For all intents and purposes, they're in distress. And there's nothing scarier than being distressed out on the water. An earthquake. Those two things. The ocean is my favorite place on earth to be, and yet it's probably the most intimidating place on earth to be too at the same time. I love it, but I respect it. And so the storm blows in. The waves are swamping the boat, and this time Jesus isn't there. This isn't the first time they've had this. We've preached this idea before. They were on the boat. Jesus is sleeping, remember? And they came to him and said, don't you care that we die? He said, what's your problem? And he quieted the storms and rebuked them for their lack of faith. But this time he's not there. Jesus is in the place of prayer, and the disciples are in a place of peril. See it with your mind's eye? What's Jesus doing? He's communing with God. He's praying. He's talking with God. He's considering all their circumstances. John the Baptist has been killed and beheaded. People are trying to make him king by force. His disciples don't get it. So he's considering everything. And what do you think he's doing with his consideration of all that's going on? I think he's doing just exactly what we did to dedicate that beautiful baby this morning. I think he's conciliating because of them. I think he's interceding because of them. I think he's mediating because of them. Prayer warriors, I think Jesus is bringing the needs of his team before God because he knows that without prayer and without that prayer blessing, there can be no miracles. So I think this is one of those times where he's teaching us to pray and to give him our needs. Let me say this, and I'm going to say this multiple times so that we don't miss it. Look at me. He always saw them. He was on the mountain praying. They're out there afraid and they're going to sink. Jesus never lost track of them. He always saw them. He saw their distress. He saw their contrary circumstances. There's a lesson of what happens with the smallest faith in this story. Now, they had paddled all night. You ever rowed a boat? Out of flat, where are you at? That's a good workout, right? It's between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning. They've been rowing all night. Guess how far they went? Anybody got a guess? Give me a guess. Show me on your fingers. How many miles do you think they went all night long? A little longer than that. How far? Closer, a little bit more. 3 miles. They rowed 3 miles all night. They were on the water when it got dark. It's between 3 and 6 in the morning now, so it's somewhere between 10 and 12 hours of rowing. They went 3 miles. Wow. No wonder they're flipping out a little bit. And then picture it, all right? We got to make this a mental movie or we're not going to get it. It's dark out. The waves are swamping the boat. You've been rowing all night and you're making no progress. 1 step up, 2 steps back. You're absolutely terrified. And then you look up and what do you see? You see this form. Wait a minute, what is that? It's walking on the water. And what do they think it was? They thought it was an apparition. They thought it was a ghost. You think they were afraid before? Now they're terrified. And he comes near, and if you read the other gospel records, as you know, I'm filling in the blanks from the other 2 records, and we're going to focus on Matthew. But as he comes near, walking on the water, guess what he was going to do? He was just going to walk right by. Oh, yeah, y'all in trouble. Let me know how it works out for you. I'll pray for you. He's going to walk by them. There's a lesson in that for another day. That's a sermon I'll preach in the future sometime. But it's as if he's going to pass by. And they saw him, and they cried out in fear because a really bad situation just got exponentially worse. Holy moly, we're going to drown and sink out here, and there's going to be a ghost to take our, right? This is bad. Let's pick up in 27 and see what actually happens. Immediately Jesus spoke to them. Have courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter answered him, command me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. And climbing out of the boat, Peter started walking on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Love, lift me. Right? Somehow or another, I need you to come and get involved so it can be well. The songs we sang earlier in the service. Come, he said, and climbing out of the boat, Peter started walking on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out what? Lord, save me. Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand, caught hold of him, and said to him the craziest thing. Not good, boy. Not you did it. Now, you wrecked, but you did it, right? This is no learning to ride a bike experience. Jesus said, wait a minute, you of little faith, why did you doubt? When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and then those in the boat worshiped him and said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now, back to our story. It's dark. The waves are above the boat. It's swamping you. You're going to drown. Here comes a ghost. You cry out in fear. You're absolutely terrified, as scared as you've ever been in your life. And something awesome happens. You hear a voice. It's a voice you recognize. And Jesus speaks. He says, in my language, look, cheer up. Cheer up. Here's the New Testament language. It's I am. That phrase where it says, it's me. How many of you have it's me in your Bibles? Right? Let me help you. When Moses said to God, God, when the people asked me what your name is and who sent me, who did he tell him to say that he was? You tell them that I am sent you. What does I am denote? It denotes a God that's omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. He's everywhere all the time. He knows everything, and he's all powerful. There is nothing too hard for him. He is always now. And Jesus talks to them and says, cheer up. I got it. It's me. Don't be afraid. I got this. Now, again, they were never out of his sight. In fact, he was interceding for them while they were flipping out, right? Peter says what? Let's have some fun here. You with me, right? You're with the story? Has it just automatically got, what's going on here? They're going to drown, right? In the dark. The only thing that got better is it ain't a ghost after all, it's Jesus, but everything still is what it is. And Jesus says, look, it's me, cheer up, don't be afraid. It's the I am. And what does Peter say? Jesus, if it's you, let me come to you instead. Let me come to you instead. And what did Jesus say? Come on. Come on. Ain't nothing between us, there and opportunity. You ever heard that one? Come on. And Peter did what? He walked on the water towards Jesus. He walked on the water towards Jesus, but then something happened. He saw the wind. Wait a minute. Can you see wind? No. What did he see? He saw the waves. He saw the billows. He saw the products of the wind, and he began to sink. You know, see Jesus, focus in faith, or see your environment, distractions, and fear. Now, symbolically in the Bible, especially in the prophetic languages, and those prophecies talk about the sea all the time, but metaphorically speaking, symbolically speaking, typologically speaking, what does the sea represent? It actually represents the sin or the world or the multitudes of sinners. So if we wanted to get a little more allegorical about this, you begin to sink in the sins of the multitudes because you take your eyes off Jesus and you're distracted and afraid. But Peter cried out something awesome. What did he cry out? Lord, save me. Whether you know it or not, whether they know it or not, whether I know it or not, until Jesus comes into our boat and becomes the leader of our life and the governor of our situations, look at me. Until Jesus becomes a permanent part of your life, you're sinking in the waves. And the only thing you can do is look at him and cry out and say what? Lord, save me. And Peter did that. Now, what did Jesus do? Are you still making your movie? You got your mind on this? We seeing this in our head? Okay, what did Jesus do? Immediately, he reached out, took Peter's hand, took hold of him, and what? He saved him. Jesus was asked to save, and Jesus saved. Love lifted him. When nothing else could help, love lifted him. Jesus lifted him. Let's look at a couple of things. Peter was almost there. He was almost there, man. How do we know that? How do we know Peter was almost there before he had his doubts and began to sink? What does the language say? Jesus just reached out. He just reached out and took his hand. What can we learn from that? Look, folks, we got to finish. We got to finish. Starting good's great. Finishing is what matters. There's a whole lot of people that are really good at starting stuff that are not very good at finishing things. We have to finish. He saved Peter, but he asked what question? Son, why did you doubt me? Why did you have so little faith? Now, let's talk about that question for a second. Do you think that, now we've been hearing this on flannel graphs our whole lives, but I think we lost the reality of that question. There's two people in the history of the world that walked on water. Two. One of them's Jesus. Who's the other one? And what's the response? Why would Jesus say to Peter that he was guilty of having small faith? He walked on the water in the storm. He got out of the boat, put his foot, say it again, because he sank. Now, more importantly, why did he sink? Yeah, listen, it only took a few loaves and a couple of fish to feed multitudes. It only took the smallest amount of faith that Peter had in Jesus to keep him above those waves. All he had to do was give God something to bless, just the smallest faith. All it took was staying focused and not getting distracted. If he would have just kept his eyes on Jesus and focused his faith on that, how big is a deal is it to keep your eyes focused on a point? Ain't that big a deal, is it? He had to just do that small thing to finish. But he was distracted at the wrong time, and it was catastrophic. Stay focused on Jesus and keep walking, and you'll rise above the waves. You'll rise above the sea. You'll rise above the multitudes. You'll rise above the sin. What did they both do then? Jesus chastised him, and I almost see it as he's walking him back, carrying him back to the boat. He says, "Oh, what are you faithful for? Why'd you doubt?" And then what did they do? They boarded the boat together. What happened? The wind ceased. That's amazing. You know what this word wind ceased? You know what that word ceased means? It means to end or exhaust from labor or fatigue or from having accomplished a purpose. If we cease working, it can mean two things or both of them. We're too tired to work anymore and we just have to stop. We have to cease. Or we're done. We can cease. That's it. Which of those two do you think it is? I think it's both. The winds had done their job. And Jesus wore them out. And what happened? Worship. 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 Feeding the multitudes did not break the hard hearts of these disciples. We're going to find that out next week. We're feeding 5,000 plus people with a few fish, with some crackers and sardines, didn't really break through the hearts of these fellas. It didn't. But when Jesus spoke and the storm obeyed and walked on the water, they worshiped. Sometimes the miracles don't get our attention. It's a shame because they should. But sometimes they don't. And they said this, "Whew, surely this is the Son of God. Lord, save me." He did. Testimony of worship. Truly, this is the Son of God. Now, if you're making notes, let's close shop on this thing. Sheets. Look at me for a second. You may be facing a storm today. It may be dark out. The wind may have blown you out to sea. And the winds may be contrary, and you're rowing as hard as you can, and your boat is going backward. You ever been there? Your life right now may be catastrophic. And okay, maybe you're distracted. Maybe you blew it. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you need to have faith. All those things. The reality of it is wherever you are is where you are. You are where you're at. And for some of us, it's a storm. If so, here's some points for you. Remember this. Here's something the disciples learned, and here's something I want you to learn. Say this with me. He brought me here. He brought me here. If Jesus is your Savior and you belong to Him, He knows where you're at. He's never taken His eyes off you. Can I tell you a secret? They were safer in that storm in God's will, the storm that Jesus sent them into, than on the shore on their own. Is that true? There's two examples of this, of these storms. There's the storm of correction. There's a storm that's sent to correct someone. That's the life of Jonah. I want you to be really excited, and I want you to start inviting your friends, because in a couple of weeks, we're going to start a series on the prophet Jonah, and you're going to be amazed by all the details within that story that are so relevant to 21st century America right now. The other type is a storm of perfection, and that's what these disciples are in. They're in a storm that's designed to strengthen them and make them better. What's the first point? He brought me here. Say it. He brought me here. What's the second one? He is praying for me. What was Jesus doing? He was on the mountain praying. When we're on the sea, right now, if you're on the sea in the storm, you know what Jesus is doing for you? He's interceding for you. He's mediating for you. In the Old English, he's your barrister. He's your attorney. He's defending you. He's got you. He says, cheer up. It's the I am. Don't be afraid. I got this. Right? He is praying for me. What's the third one? He will come to me. He will come to me. Again, look at me. You're in the storm. You fear to sink. You don't know what you're going to do. Jesus is praying for you, but Jesus also takes action. He's going to come for you. And his coming may scare the fool out of you at first, especially if you've never heard or seen or had any interaction with him above and beyond a salvation experience. Why didn't they recognize Jesus? Why didn't these disciples recognize Jesus? They just left him because they weren't looking for him. They didn't expect him to come. They were looking for something else, but it wasn't Jesus. What do they think he was? A ghost. Don't you think he recognized Jesus coming? They didn't. They knew him a whole lot better than we do. That's not what they were looking for. They were seeing their fear. They were seeing their circumstances. They were sinking. That's all they could see. And everything from there had to be bad. You ever been in the midst of a storm and you just begin to assume there's a booger in every bush? You know what I mean? Look, my life is so bad, everything's got to be bad. I'm going to quit even thinking that something good's going to happen for me. You ever been there? That's where these disciples are at, I think. He brought me here. He is praying for me. He will come to me, and he will help me grow. He will help me grow. He's going to help me grow. In fact, he's going to grow me. My growth comes from Jesus. There's nothing I can do myself. He's going to help me grow. Why walk on the water? Why would Jesus walk on the water? There's other ways he could have done this. He didn't do it this way the first time. You know what I think it is? The things that make us afraid. Right now, have you ever been scared in your life for circumstances or things that you couldn't control? Maybe it's a real storm. If you've ever been in a tornado, let me tell you, ain't nobody ain't afraid of them bad boys. They'll scare the fool out of you. I don't mind hurricanes. Tornadoes scare the dickens out of you. Earthquakes will scare you. The economy's scary. The job market's scary. The idea that we're supposed to live for Jesus, that's scary. You ever been scared? Why did he walk on water? Because the things that make us afraid are just a sidewalk for him. He just walks on them things. Those things that you're terrified about, those things that are bothering you, he just walks on them. Ain't nothing to him. How big a deal is it to take a walk? A big deal. I hate it. But, I mean, theoretically speaking, anybody can just get up and walk, right? Ain't fun. Why this whole exercise phase, all this walking? When my man came out with that combustion engine, wow, would anybody ever walk again? I'm just saying. But anyway, it's easy to walk. There's nothing to it. You know what Isaiah said? Here's a promise for God's people. Listen to me. Let me read this to you. I will be with you when you pass through the waters. I'll be with you. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. The whole purpose of this was to teach them that. Teach them that. We have to learn as disciples, as God's children, we have to trust him from a distance. You got to learn to trust Jesus from a distance. The second thing, let's look at Peter again. What was Peter's doubt about? What was that really about? He was distracted. He stood at a crossroads in his life. He stood at a position of uncertainty. Do I keep looking at Jesus and trust, or do I see my circumstances and sink? I'm at a crossroads. What did he do? He was distracted. It was catastrophic. It was at the wrong time. He was distracted at the wrong time. That's one of those times when driving when you need, won't get it done. You may want to write this down. Faith is not believing in spite of the evidence, okay? Faith is not believing in spite of the evidence, but obeying in spite of the consequence. Faith isn't believing in spite of the evidence. It's being obedient in spite of the consequence. Does that make sense? Write it down and think about it. We'll talk about it more next week. He's going to come to me. He's going to help me grow. He will see me through. God's going to see me through. Look at me for a second. We're going to fail. Along the way, we're going to fail God. We're going to fail God raising our children. We're going to fail God helping families raise their children. We're going to fail God with our time. We're going to fail God using our talents for Him. We're going to fail God giving Him our treasure. We're going to fail in life. Anybody perfect? Anybody doing it exactly right? No. When we fail along the way, Jesus won't. It's just a sidewalk for Him. It's nothing. 2 people have walked on the water in the history of the world, Jesus and Peter. But an individual lack of faith and Jesus' response resulted in corporate faith. It probably stunk to be Peter at first. But you know what happened because of Peter's circumstance? Not only did Peter worship God and learn a lesson, they all did. Not all of them had the nerve to get out of the boat. But they all saw the miracle and they all got to see the power of Jesus. But Peter got to see it firsthand. Which one are you? Are you the crowd that stays in the boat and eggs someone else on? Or are you the one that gets out of the boat and gets to see the miracle? We're going to fail. But which are you? Surely He is the Son of God. He is. Worship. He's the Son of God. Let me tell you a story. There was a helicopter pilot, and he was flying back to his ship when this blinding fog rolled in. And he's flying at a low altitude, so he knew that a single mistake, and he would plunge right into the ocean. Now, worse yet, he was beginning to lose a complete loss of balance and his sense of direction because he was flying from his instruments and he couldn't see anything. It was starting to get into his head. And that's common for pilots flying by instruments, it turns out. I'll get my uncle here one of these days. He was a Vietnam helicopter pilot, and we'll get him to tell us some stories. They're awesome. But when he's flying with these instruments and he's in this fog and he can't see his nose in front of his face, figuratively speaking, he begins to doubt his instruments and he begins to feel like what? Like he's flying on his side or he's flying upside down. He has a complete loss of balance. And for 15 minutes he had to fly that way. Does that seem like a long time? You try it. 15 minutes is a drop in a bucket or it's eternity. He had to fight the urge to change from trusting his instruments to trusting his emotions. When he finally broke through the fog, you know what he was thankful for? He was thankful that somebody trained him to rely on his instruments. That's what people who live by faith do. That's what they do. They remember that feelings can be misleading. Emotions can be misleading. But living in the truths of God's Word is reliable and consistent. The Christian life, like walking on water, is humanly impossible. The Christian life is not possible. No one can get it right on their own. It can only be lived by the power of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the instruments that keeps us guided even when we don't feel like we're headed in the right direction. Look, storms are coming, man. If you haven't been in a storm in your life yet, they're coming. It's coming. The fog's going to roll in. You're not going to be able to see. You're going to feel like you're on your side. You're going to feel like you're upside down. But all the instruments, the Spirit's going to say, no, keep doing what you're doing. Everything is right. But the waves are tall and it's dark and there's a ghost and I'm terrified. No, settle. It's not about what you feel. It's about what I've taught you. So when you're in that storm and the wind's raging and the waves are pounding and the fog's rolling in, you can't see and you're sinking, here's your take home. Remember this. Simple faith, small faith, focused on Jesus will carry me through the storm. What's the little bit of God we give that he can bless no matter what our circumstances? Simple faith. Now, what makes this faith simple? What did Peter need to do that he didn't do? It was so easy. Where was his mistake? What should he have done to keep from sinking? Keep your eyes on Jesus. Sounds so simple. Just focus on Jesus. Keep your eyes on Christ. But he had a hard time doing that. The same Lord who stills the storm sometimes allows the storm. In fact, sometimes he guides us into the storm. Now it's our turn as a church. Let's close with this. We begin to fear, and then we begin to sink. When we begin to fear, we begin to sink. That's not just true as individuals. Look at me, church. When we begin to fear our circumstances and our situation, and we allow anything to divert our attention and focus from God, we begin to sink. We've lost the idea of flying from our instruments, and we're working on emotion. But here's the thing. God appreciates our baby steps. He likes it. He likes that you can get out the boat and walk a little bit. But what does he want us to do? He don't want us to sink. He wants us to finish. There comes a point in your life where God expects more than baby steps. He loves that you get out of the boat. He thinks that's great. And he loves that we get started. That's fantastic. But what he really wants us to do is not sink and to grow in him. I had a car one time. You know what a Chevette is? That's a chick magnet, buddy. Huh? Woo! Second only to a Pinto or a Gremlin, buddy. That thing was bad. I had a 4-door tan Chevette with one brown door. I tell you what, I couldn't shake them off with a stick. I'd be driving down Highway 35 West headed to Fort Worth, and all of a sudden the hood would just fly out. And I'd have to trust my instruments. Gear it down, find the side of the road. I had a tendency to drive in the right lane because of that. But that car at one point or another, probably because I was a knucklehead, I got an alignment problem. And it pulled to the right real bad. You ever had a car that did that? It pulled really bad to the right. In fact, I had to work really hard to even change lanes to go left or even turn left. But guess what? Shoot, man. To get in the right lane or to make a right turn, Jesus, take the wheel. All I had to do is let go. It'd go right. It was like driving itself. I didn't have to use my leg. If right now you just let go of the wheel of your life, if you let go right now of the wheel of your life, where would your mind and your heart take you? Where would you end up? What forces are tugging on you these days that have taken your attention off Christ and his love for you and his plan for you, his forgiveness for you, his mercy for you, his grace for you? Is it relationship troubles? Health concerns? Maybe finances? Some sin you refuse to address? Something from your past that won't let you rest? These are the kind of distractions that are out there, and there are many more. Any number of things that can get us off our course and that really put us in a situation where we can't possibly get back. That's the bad news. But the good news is that for as much as your focus gets pulled off Jesus, for as much as you lose your attention just for a second, for as much as you're distracted, God never takes his eyes off you. You may be distracted, you may get off point, but God's focused, and you're his focus. For as much as we go to one extreme or the other, God's Spirit is always willing with us, trying to direct us. That's how it is. Jacob's going to begin playing some music. We're going to close. I don't know what storm you're facing. I don't. But God knows. God knows. God knows where you are. It doesn't matter what it is. is hear me say this. He brought us here. He brought us here. Now, did God cause your problems? No. There are storms of correction and storms of perfection, and sometimes there's just storms. But when you're in the storm, what difference does it make where it came from? All you know is you're in the storm. Look, He brought us here today. He brought you here to this place in your life. He's praying for you. Do you know that right now that Jesus sits at the right hand of God making intercession for you? He's constantly taking your back before God in heaven right now. Read the story of Job. He's doing that for you. He'll help you grow if you let Him. Do you want to grow? Do you want to be more mature and grow in Jesus? He'll do it. And He'll come to you to get it done. And no matter what, hear me say this, He will see you through. I don't do this very often, but sometimes saying something out loud makes it more real. I don't know where you are in your life, but just say this with me. He will see me through. He'll see me through. I didn't hear you. He'll see me through. I can trust Him. He's never taken His eyes off me. He's seen me the whole time. Fly by the instruments. Fly by the Spirit. Whatever it is that's taking your attention from those instruments and from that Spirit, you need to leave it here today. You need to let it go, because otherwise you're going to sink. You're going to sink in the waves. And you're going to have those experiences that go along with it. And more often than not, we take people down with us.